The sun hung like a molten coin in the vast expanse of the Montana sky as Hannah Vance stumbled into the dusty town of Redemption Creek, her once fine dress now little more than tattered rags that clung to her slender frame. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild, untamed, and unforgiving, especially to a woman alone. Hannah clutched her small bundle of belongings tightly to her chest as she made her way down the main street, painfully aware of the stares that followed her. Her chestnut hair, once her pride and joy, now hung in limp strands around her dirt-smudged face. 3 weeks on the trail with nothing but a stolen horse that had died 2 days ago had left her looking more like a vagabond than the educated banker's daughter she'd been back east. The sound of laughter pierced the air as Hannah passed the town's only saloon, the Rusty Nail. A group of well-dressed women standing outside took one look at her and erupted into giggles behind gloved hands. "My word, look what the wind blew in," said one, her voice carrying deliberately. "I've seen scarecrows better dressed." Hannah kept her eyes forward, dignity still intact despite her appearance. She'd endured far worse than petty insults on her journey west. The women's laughter grew louder as she passed, but Hannah refused to quicken her pace. "They say the Lord watches over fools and children," another woman remarked. "I wonder which one she is." More laughter followed, cutting through Hannah like a knife. But she continued walking, head held high despite the humiliation burning in her cheeks. It was then that a tall figure stepped out from the shadows of the general store's porch. The man wore a dusty denim jacket over a faded red shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days shaded his features. His boots were worn from long days in the saddle, and the revolver at his hip had the patina of a tool rather than an ornament. "That's enough, ladies," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Don't you have anything better to do than mock a stranger?" The women's laughter died down, replaced by indignant huffs and whispers as they retreated into the millinery shop. Hannah stopped, wary but grateful for the intervention. The man approached slowly, and as he came closer, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or so, with a face tanned by the sun and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Don't mind them," he said, tipping his hat respectfully. "They're just bored and mean-spirited." Hannah nodded, too exhausted and hungry to manage much more. "Name's Matthew Finch," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Town marshal, though most days it feels more like being a schoolyard peacekeeper." "Hannah Vance," she replied, her voice raspy from thirst as she briefly took his hand. I'm looking for work and a place to stay." Matthew studied her for a moment, his gaze not unkind but assessing. "You've come a long way, I reckon." It wasn't a question, but Hannah answered anyway. "Philadelphia, nearly 2 months on the road." A whistle escaped his lips. "That's a journey. What brings you all the way to Redemption Creek?" Hannah hesitated. The truth was complicated and painful. "A fresh start," she said simply. Matthew nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "Well, Mrs. Grayson at the boarding house might have a room, and the Rusty Nail is looking for help, though I wouldn't recommend it for a lady like yourself." Hannah almost laughed at that, a lady like herself, standing in the middle of a dusty street in rags. "I'm not particular about the work, Marshal. I just need to earn my keep." "There's the schoolhouse," Matthew suggested. "Teacher left last month to get married. Town's been looking for a replacement." Hope flickered in Hannah's chest. She had been a teacher's assistant back in Philadelphia before everything fell apart. "I could teach," she said, straightening her shoulders despite her fatigue. "I'm educated." Matthew's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "The town council meets tomorrow afternoon. I could put in a word." Just then, a wagon rolled past and the driver called out, "Hey, Marshal. Who's your new friend? Looks like she tangled with a tornado and lost." More laughter erupted from the men sitting in front of the barbershop, and Hannah felt her resolve beginning to crumble. She'd endured so much to get here, and now this reception was threatening to break what little spirit she had left. Matthew's jaw tightened, and he turned to face the men. "That's enough, Cooper," he called back, his voice firm. "Show some respect." "Hard to respect someone who looks like they've been dragged behind a stampede." another man called out to the delight of his companions. Hannah began to walk away, unwilling to be the source of more amusement, but Matthew gently caught her elbow. "Wait," he said softly, then raised his voice so the others could hear. "They laughed when she arrived in rags," he announced, his eyes never leaving Hannah's face. "But I say then rags look holy tonight." The unexpected defense left Hannah speechless. The laughter died down, replaced by awkward shuffling as the men, chastised, returned to their conversations. "Thank you," Hannah whispered, genuinely moved by the gesture. Matthew shrugged. "My ma always said it's not what's on the outside that matters. Come on, I'll walk you to the boarding house." "Mrs. Grayson's a bit prickly, but she's fair." As they walked side by side down the dusty street, Hannah felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. Perhaps Redemption Creek would live up to its name after all. Mrs. Grayson's boarding house was a two-story white clapboard building at the end of Main Street, with a wraparound porch and blue gingham curtains in the windows. The older woman who answered the door had steel-gray hair pulled into a tight bun and shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "Marshal Finch," she acknowledged, then let her gaze travel over Hannah, taking in the torn dress and dirty face without comment. "What brings you here?" "Mrs. Grayson, this is Miss Hannah Vance. She's new in town and needs a place to stay," Matthew explained. "I can pay," Hannah added quickly, reaching into her bundle to extract a small leather pouch. "I have some money saved." Mrs. Grayson's expression softened slightly. "Put that away, child. We'll discuss payment after you've had a bath and a hot meal. You look ready to drop where you stand." Relief washed over Hannah. "Thank you, I'm willing to work for my board as well." "We'll talk about that too," the older woman said, stepping aside to allow Hannah entry. She turned to Matthew. "I assume you'll be putting her name forward for the teaching position." Matthew nodded. "Council meets tomorrow. I think they'll be glad to have someone qualified." "Good. Now off with you, Marshal. This young lady needs rest, not an audience while she cleans up." Despite her brusque words, there was a hint of warmth in Mrs. Grayson's tone. Matthew tipped his hat to both women. "Miss Vance, I'll come by tomorrow to escort you to the council meeting, if that's agreeable." "That would be very kind, thank you," Hannah replied, managing a small smile despite her exhaustion, as the door closed behind the marshal. Mrs. Grayson led Hannah up a narrow staircase to a small but clean room at the back of the house. "Bathrooms down the hall. I'll have hot water sent up, and I'll find you something decent to wear. Those rags are fit for nothing but burning." Hannah's fingers tightened reflexively on her bundle. "Please, if you could just wash them." Mrs. Grayson's eyebrows rose. "You want to keep that dress, child, it's barely holding together." "The fabric, it was my mother's wedding dress," Hannah admitted quietly. "It's all I have left of her." Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. "I see. Well, we'll do what we can with it, but you'll still need proper clothing." She patted Hannah's shoulder. "Rest now, we'll talk more at supper." Left alone, Hannah sank onto the narrow bed, the events of the past months crashing over her like a wave. She had fled Philadelphia with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small inheritance her mother had secretly left her, hidden from her father's gambling creditors. The journey west had been perilous. She'd been robbed outside St. Louis, leaving her with barely enough to continue. She'd worked odd jobs along the way, sleeping in barns and under the stars, determined to reach a place where no one knew her name or her shame. And now she was here in a town called Redemption Creek, with a marshal who had defended her honor and a stern boarding-house keeper who had shown more kindness than Hannah had seen in months. Perhaps this was where she could finally stop running. Later that evening, after a bath that had turned the water gray and a meal that Hannah had to force herself to eat slowly despite her hunger, she sat in Mrs. Grayson's parlor, wearing a borrowed dress that hung loose on her frame. "You're too thin, child," Mrs. Grayson observed, pouring tea. "Been on the road a long time, I take it." Hannah nodded, cradling the warm cup in her hands. "Nearly 2 months, running to something or away from something." When Hannah hesitated, the older woman waved a hand. "Never mind, we all have our reasons for ending up in a place like Redemption Creek." "Lord knows I had mine." "It seems like a decent town," Hannah ventured. Mrs. Grayson snorted. It has its share of troublemakers and gossips like anywhere, but there are good people too. She studied Hannah over her spectacles. You've had schooling? Yes. My mother was insistent on education, even for girls. A sad smile touched Hannah's lips. She taught me herself until I was 12, then convinced my father to send me to a ladies' seminary. And you've taught before. I was an assistant at a girls' school in Philadelphia for 3 years, Hannah confirmed. Mrs. Grayson nodded, satisfied. The town needs a teacher. Children running wild since Miss Hathaway left. The marshal was right to suggest you for the position. I'm grateful for his kindness, Hannah said, remembering the way Matthew had stood up for her. Not everyone would defend a stranger dressed in rags. Matthew Finch is a good man, Mrs. Grayson agreed. Lost his wife and child to fever 5 years back. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair to everyone. She set down her cup. Now, about your situation. I'll provide room and board at a reduced rate until you're on your feet. In exchange, you'll help with chores around the house in your spare time. That's more than generous, Hannah said sincerely. We'll see if you still think so when you're scrubbing floors, the older woman replied dryly, but there was a twinkle in her eye. Now off to bed with you. Tomorrow's an important day. The next morning, Hannah awoke to sunshine streaming through the window and the smell of coffee wafting up from downstairs. For a moment, she forgot where she was, the unfamiliar ceiling above her causing a spike of panic. Then reality settled in, and with it, a strange sense of peace. She was in Redemption Creek, far from Philadelphia and its painful memories. After dressing in a simple blue dress Mrs. Grayson had altered for her overnight, Hannah made her way downstairs. The boarding house's dining room held a long table where several other boarders were already eating breakfast. Ah, there she is, Mrs. Grayson announced. Everyone, this is Miss Vance. She'll be staying with us for a while. The other boarders, 2 elderly sisters, a middle-aged man who introduced himself as the town's telegraph operator, and a young woman who worked at the general store greeted Hannah politely. There were curious glances, but no outright hostility, which was more than Hannah had expected after yesterday's reception in town. The marshal came by earlier. Mrs. Grayson informed her as she placed a plate of eggs and bacon before Hannah. Said he'd return at 1 o'clock to escort you to the council meeting. Hannah nodded, suddenly nervous. What if the council rejected her application? What would she do then? Stop fretting, Mrs. Grayson said, as if reading her thoughts. You'll do fine. Just be honest about your qualifications and don't let old Hargrove intimidate you. Hargrove, Mayor Hargrove, the telegraph operator, Mr. Simmons, explained, thinks being mayor of a town this size makes him important. Just nod and look impressed when he talks. That drew chuckles from around the table, easing some of Hannah's tension. For the first time in months, she felt almost normal, sitting at a breakfast table engaged in ordinary conversation, after helping Mrs. Grayson with the breakfast dishes. Hannah spent the morning mending some of the boarding house linens, grateful for the chance to make herself useful. Her mind kept drifting to Marshal Finch and his unexpected defense of her. Then rags look holy tonight, he had said, transforming her shame into something almost sacred with just a few words. Precisely at 1 o'clock, there was a knock at the front door. Hannah's heart quickened as she heard Mrs. Grayson greeting the marshal, then calling her name. Matthew Finch stood in the entryway, hat in hand. He had traded his dusty clothes for a clean shirt and jacket, though his boots were still worn from miles of riding. His eyes widened slightly as they fell on Hannah. Miss Vance, he said, inclining his head, you look rested. Amazing what a bath and a decent meal can do, Mrs. Grayson remarked dryly. Now off with you both. Don't keep the council waiting. The walk to the town hall was short, but gave Hannah time to appreciate Redemption Creek in daylight. It wasn't a large settlement, perhaps 30 buildings clustered around the main street, with scattered homesteads visible in the distance. The mountains rose majestically to the west, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. It's beautiful here, Hannah remarked, breaking the silence between them. It grows on you, Matthew agreed. Been here 7 years now, came out as a deputy, became marshal after the old one retired. He glanced at her. How are you finding Mrs. Grayson's place? She's been very kind, Hannah said. Everyone has, really, it's unexpected. Despite appearances, most folks here are decent, Matthew said, just wary of strangers at first. Too many drifters and troublemakers pass through. And which am I? Hannah asked before she could stop herself. Matthew's lips quirked up. Neither, I'd wager. You're running from something, but you're no trouble. When Hannah tensed, he added quickly, not prying, Miss Vance. Everyone's entitled to their secrets. They had reached the town hall, a modest wooden building with a small bell tower. Matthew paused at the door, his expression turning serious. The council's 5 men, Mayor Hargrove, who owns the bank, Dr. Peterson, Mr. Lloyd from the general store, Reverend Williams, and Mr. Cooper, who owns the cattle operation outside town. They're fair, mostly, but set in their ways. Just be straightforward with them. Hannah nodded, squaring her shoulders. I appreciate your support, Marshal, Matthew, he corrected gently. In a town this size, titles get cumbersome. Matthew, she repeated, offering a small smile, and I'm Hannah. The council meeting was held in a sparse room dominated by a long table where 5 men sat with varying expressions of interest and skepticism. Mayor Hargrove, a portly man with impressive side whiskers, called the meeting to order as Hannah and Matthew entered. Marshal Finch, the mayor acknowledged, then turned his gaze to Hannah, and this must be the applicant for the teaching position. Yes, sir, Matthew replied. This is Miss Hannah Vance, recently arrived from Philadelphia. She has experience as a teacher's assistant and is well educated. Hannah stepped forward, willing her voice to remain steady. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm grateful for the opportunity to present myself as a candidate for the teaching position. For the next half hour, Hannah answered questions about her educational background, teaching experience, and views on discipline and curriculum. She spoke clearly and confidently, drawing on her years at the seminary and her time teaching in Philadelphia. And why did you leave your previous position, Miss Vance? Dr. Peterson inquired, his tone curious rather than accusatory. Hannah had prepared for this question. My father passed away, she said, which was true as far as it went. With his death, I found myself needing a change of scenery and a fresh start. It wasn't the whole truth. She didn't mention her father's gambling debts, the creditors who had threatened her, or the hasty departure in the middle of the night, but it was truth enough for now. I see, the doctor said sympathetically. My condolences. One more question, Miss Vance, Mayor Hargrove said. Our school term begins in 2 weeks. Are you prepared to take on this responsibility so quickly? Hannah nodded without hesitation. Yes, sir. I could begin preparations immediately, reviewing the existing materials and developing a plan for the term. The mayor exchanged glances with the other council members, then nodded. Very well. The council will deliberate. Please wait outside and we'll inform you of our decision shortly. Hannah and Matthew stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind them. Hannah let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. You did well in there, Matthew assured her. Better than well. You're clearly qualified. Thank you. Hannah leaned against the wall, suddenly tired. It feels strange to be planning for the future again. For so long, I've just been focusing on surviving each day. Matthew's eyes softened with understanding. That's the hardest part about starting over, allowing yourself to hope again. Before Hannah could respond, the door opened, and Mayor Hargrove beckoned them back inside. Hannah's heart pounded as she stood before the council once more. Miss Vance, the mayor began formally, after consideration of your qualifications and experience, the Town Council of Redemption Creek is pleased to offer you the position of schoolteacher, effective immediately. Relief and joy washed over Hannah. Thank you, gentlemen, I accept with gratitude. Your salary will be $40 per month, with the schoolhouse cottage provided for your residence, the mayor continued. Mrs. Lloyd at the general store will assist you with any supplies you need for the classroom. The children range from 6 to 16 years of age, Reverend Williams added. About 20 in total, though attendance can be irregular when the farms need tending. Hannah nodded, already mentally organizing a teaching plan. I understand. I'll do my best to make the lessons engaging enough that they'll want to attend. Your enthusiasm is commendable, Mr. Lloyd said with a smile. My own children will be in your class. Emily's 10 and James is 8. They've been running wild since Miss Hathaway left. The meeting concluded with handshakes all around, and Hannah found herself officially employed for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. As she and Matthew exited the town hall into the late afternoon sunshine, she felt lighter than she had in months. Congratulations, teacher, Matthew said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. Looks like Redemption Creek just got a bit more civilized. Hannah laughed, the sound surprising her. When was the last time she had truly laughed? I wouldn't go that far yet. I haven't met my students. I'll walk you back to Mrs. Grayson's, Matthew offered. Unless you'd like to see the schoolhouse first, I would love to, Hannah said eagerly. If you have the time. For Redemption Creek's newest citizen, always. There was a warmth in his voice that made Hannah glance at him curiously, but his expression remained friendly and professional. They walked together toward the eastern edge of town, where a small white building stood alone on a slight rise, a bell tower rising from its roof. Beside it was a modest cottage, its windows currently shuttered. It's not much, Matthew said as they approached, but it's solid. The cottage was built 2 years ago when the town decided it needed a permanent teacher. The schoolhouse was indeed simple, one large room with rows of benches and desks, a larger desk at the front for the teacher, and a blackboard covering most of one wall. But it was clean and well maintained, with large windows that would provide ample light. It's perfect, Hannah said sincerely, running her hand along one of the desks. This small schoolhouse represented everything she had hoped for, a chance to start anew, to be useful, to build a life. Matthew produced a key from his pocket. Mayor asked me to give you this. It opens both the schoolhouse and the cottage. Hannah took it, the metal warm from being in his pocket. Thank you for everything. If you hadn't spoken up for me yesterday, you'd have been fine, Matthew assured her. You're stronger than you look. The unexpected compliment warmed Hannah. Still, I'm grateful. They walked to the cottage next door, and Hannah unlocked it, pushing open the door to reveal a simple but comfortable living space, a main room with a small kitchen area, a bedroom visible through a doorway, and a tiny second room that might serve as a study. The town maintains it, Matthew explained. Reverend's wife arranged for some basic furnishings when Miss Hathaway came 2 years ago. Hannah moved through the space, already imagining it as her own. After months on the road and years before that living under her father's roof, the idea of a place that was truly hers filled her with a quiet joy. I'll bring my things over from Mrs. Grayson's tomorrow, she decided, and start preparing the classroom. I'll help, Matthew offered. Day off tomorrow, and I'm handy with a hammer if anything needs fixing. Hannah turned to face him, struck again by his kindness. Why are you helping me like this? Matthew looked away for a moment, as if considering his answer. Everyone deserves a second chance, he said finally. Redemption Creek gave me mine after I lost my family. Seems only right to pass it on. The vulnerability in his admission touched Hannah deeply. This man had known loss too, yet he had found a way to rebuild his life here. I'm sorry about your wife and child, she said softly. It was a long time ago, Matthew replied, though the shadow in his eyes suggested the pain was still fresh. Sarah and little Thomas, fever took them both in a week. He cleared his throat. Anyway, I should let you get back to Mrs. Grayson's. She'll be wanting to hear your news. As they walked back through town, Hannah was aware of the glances they received, some curious, some disapproving. The women who had laughed at her the day before were nowhere to be seen, but Hannah knew small towns well enough to know that gossip traveled fast. They'll be talking about us, she murmured. Matthew shrugged. Let them. Nothing improper about the town marshal escorting the new schoolteacher around, but there was something in his tone that made Hannah wonder if he was as unconcerned as he appeared. When they reached Mrs. Grayson's porch, he paused. I'll come by around 9 tomorrow if that suits, he said. Help you move your things to the cottage. That would be wonderful, thank you. Hannah hesitated, then added impulsively, would you like to stay for supper? I'm sure Mrs. Grayson wouldn't mind setting an extra place. Matthew's smile was warm but regretful. Another time, perhaps, I've got rounds to make, he tipped his hat. Until tomorrow, Miss Vance. Hannah, she corrected gently. Hannah, he echoed, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Then Matthew turned and walked away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Mrs. Grayson was delighted by Hannah's news, though she made a show of being disappointed about losing a boarder so soon. "Well, can't say I'm surprised," she said as they prepared supper together. "Anyone with eyes could see you're educated. The children will be lucky to have you." "I saw the Marshal walking you back," one of the elderly sisters, Miss Prudence, remarked with a knowing smile. "He's quite handsome, isn't he?" Hannah felt a blush rising in her cheeks. "He's been very kind. He's helping me move my things tomorrow." "Is he now, Mrs.?" Grayson exchanged glances with the sisters. Well, it's nothing like that," Hannah protested. "He's simply being helpful." "Of course he is, dear," Miss Prudence's sister, Miss Patience, said soothingly, though her eyes twinkled with amusement. "Matthew Finch is helpful to everyone. That's why he spends all his free time escorting new arrivals around town." The teasing was good-natured, and Hannah found herself relaxing into the companionable atmosphere of the boarding house kitchen. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt as if she might be finding not just a place to stay, but a home. The next morning dawned clear and bright, and Hannah was up early, packing her few belongings and helping Mrs. Grayson with breakfast. By the time Matthew arrived, she was ready to begin her new life. "Won't be much of a move," she said apologetically as she showed him her single bundle and the dress that Mrs. Grayson had altered for her. "We'll stop by the general store," Matthew decided. "Get you some basics to start with. The town has a fund for the schoolteacher's necessities." Hannah began to protest, uncomfortable with the idea of charity, but Matthew held up a hand. "It's not charity, Hannah. It's an investment in the town's future. Educated children mean a prosperous community." Put that way, Hannah could accept the help more easily. "All right, but just the essentials." They bid farewell to Mrs. Grayson, who extracted a promise from Hannah to come to Sunday dinner, then set off toward the general store. The town was busy this morning, with wagons delivering goods and people going about their business. Hannah noticed that she received fewer curious stares today, though several people nodded in greeting. "Word travels fast," Matthew observed. "Everyone knows you're the new teacher now." "Is that why they're being polite?" Hannah asked wryly. Matthew chuckled. "Partly. Also, you don't look like you've been dragged behind a horse for 20 miles anymore." Hannah laughed despite herself. "I must have been a sight yesterday." "You looked like someone who'd traveled a hard road," Matthew said more seriously. "There's no shame in that." The general store was a large establishment that seemed to carry everything from foodstuffs to farming equipment. Mr. Lloyd, whom Hannah recognized from the council meeting, greeted them warmly. "Miss Vance, welcome, welcome. Martha, come meet our new teacher," he called to a pleasant-looking woman arranging fabric bolts. "My wife," he explained to Hannah, Mrs. Lloyd hurried over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Oh, we're so pleased you're here, Miss Vance. The children have been running wild without proper schooling." "I'm looking forward to meeting them," Hannah said sincerely. "And please call me Hannah." "Hannah needs some basic supplies for the cottage," Matthew explained. "Council approved the usual allowance." Of course, Mr. Lloyd said. "Whatever you need, my dear. Martha can help you with household items, and I'll gather the school supplies." For the next hour, Hannah selected modest but necessary items: bedding, towels, basic cookware, and pantry staples. Mrs. Lloyd was helpful without being overbearing, and when Hannah glanced at her ruined dress, the woman discreetly led her to the fabric section. "Perhaps some material for new clothes," she suggested gently. "I'm a fair hand with a needle, and I'd be happy to help until you can get a proper wardrobe." Hannah ran her fingers over a bolt of simple blue cotton. "That's very kind. I can sew reasonably well myself, but I would appreciate the company." By the time they had finished, Matthew had loaded a wagon with Hannah's new possessions, including school supplies and a stack of books Mr. Lloyd had ordered for the previous teacher but had arrived too late. "This is more than I expected," Hannah said, overwhelmed by the generosity. Consider it a welcome gift, Mr. Lloyd said warmly. We've been without a teacher for 2 months. The town is eager to have the school running again. As they drove the short distance to the schoolhouse, Hannah sat beside Matthew on the wagon seat, acutely aware of his presence. He handled the horses with ease, his hands strong and confident on the reins. "Thank you again," she said quietly, "for everything." Matthew glanced at her, his expression softening. "You're welcome, but soon enough you'll be the one this town is thanking. Education matters out here, maybe more than back east. Children need to be prepared for a changing world." Hannah was struck by his perspective. "You're a thoughtful man, Matthew Finch." A slight flush colored his tan cheeks. "Just practical. My pa couldn't read or write, made everything harder than it needed to be." At the cottage, they unloaded the supplies, and Matthew helped Hannah arrange the heavier furniture. By noon, the small space was beginning to look like a home. Matthew built a fire in the stove, and Hannah prepared a simple lunch from the provisions they'd brought. They ate at the small table by the window, the domesticity of the scene not lost on either of them. Hannah found conversation with Matthew surprisingly easy. He spoke of the town and its inhabitants, giving her insights that would help her navigate her new community. In turn, she shared stories of her teaching experiences, carefully avoiding any mention of the circumstances of her departure from Philadelphia. "You'll need to meet some of the families before school starts," Matthew said as they finished their meal. "The Reardons have 4 children in school age and they live the furthest out. Might be good to visit them first, let them know what to expect." Would you be willing to introduce me?" Hannah asked hesitantly. "Just until I get my bearings." "I'd be happy to," Matthew replied, his smile warming his eyes. "Sunday after church might be a good time. Most families come to town then anyway." They spent the rest of the afternoon organizing the schoolhouse, cleaning the accumulated dust and arranging the desks in neat rows. Hannah stood at the teacher's desk, imagining the room filled with children, and felt a surge of purpose. "It's going to be wonderful," she said, more to herself than to Matthew. "Yes," he agreed, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "I believe it will be." As dusk approached, Matthew reluctantly took his leave. "I should go. Early start tomorrow. Cattle rustlers reported near the north pastures." "Be careful," Hannah said, surprising herself with the genuine concern in her voice. Matthew paused at the door. "I always am, but thank you for caring." He hesitated, then added, "I'm glad you came to Redemption Creek, Hannah Vance." After he left, Hannah stood in the doorway of her new home, watching as his figure disappeared down the path toward town. The past 2 days had been a whirlwind, transforming her from a desperate wanderer to a woman with a purpose, a home, and perhaps even the beginnings of friendship. As she closed the door against the gathering darkness, Hannah allowed herself to believe that perhaps her luck had finally changed. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity as Hannah prepared for the school term. True to his word, Matthew introduced her to many of the families after Sunday services, where Reverend Williams had formally welcomed her to the community. The reception was mostly warm, though Hannah noticed a few of the town's more prosperous women, including those who had laughed at her arrival, maintained a cool distance. "Don't mind the Atkinson sisters," Mrs. Lloyd advised when she came to help Hannah sew some new clothes. "They think having a father who owns the sawmill makes them special, and Mrs. Cooper is just jealous because the Marshal pays you attention." "There's nothing between Marshal Finch and me," Hannah protested, though the words didn't sound entirely convincing even to her own ears. Mrs. Lloyd simply smiled knowingly and changed the subject. The truth was, Matthew had become a frequent visitor to the schoolhouse, often bringing small gifts, a plant for the windowsill, a new pen for her desk, fresh eggs from his neighbor's chickens. His visits were always proper, usually during daylight hours and often with a practical purpose, but Hannah found herself looking forward to them more than she cared to admit. On the Sunday before school was to begin, Matthew arrived at Hannah's cottage with a small covered basket. "Thought you might like to have a picnic," he said, almost shyly. "There's a nice spot by the creek that gives the town its name. Might be your last chance for relaxation before the children descend." Hannah hesitated only briefly before accepting. That sounds lovely, let me get my shawl. The spot Matthew had chosen was indeed beautiful, a grassy bank beside a clear, bubbling creek shaded by cottonwood trees. They spread a blanket on the ground, and Matthew unpacked the basket to reveal fried chicken, biscuits, and apple pie. "Did you make all this?" Hannah asked, impressed. Matthew laughed. "Lord, no. Mrs. Grayson took pity on me, said if I was going to court the schoolteacher properly, I'd need more than my own sorry cooking." The word court hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly but both acutely aware of its implications. "It's been a long time since I had a picnic," Hannah said, changing the subject slightly, "not since before my mother died." "How old were you?" Matthew asked gently. 16. Hannah gazed at the flowing water. She had consumption, father was, different after she passed, harsher. Matthew nodded, understanding in his eyes. Grief changes people, some turn inward, some lash out. "Which did you do?" Hannah asked quietly, "after your wife and son?" "Both, I suppose," Matthew admitted. "Spent a year drinking too much and picking fights. Then one day I woke up in a jail cell in Cheyenne and realized Sarah would have been ashamed of what I'd become." He picked up a stone and skipped it across the water. "Came to Redemption Creek to start over. Town needed a deputy and I needed a purpose." Hannah reached out impulsively and touched his hand. "I think she would be proud of the man you are now." Matthew turned his hand over and gently clasped hers, the simple contact sending warmth through her arm. "Thank you for saying that." After a moment, he released her hand and cleared his throat. "We should eat before the chicken gets cold." As they ate, the conversation turned to lighter topics: the approaching harvest festival, the progress on the new church building, Matthew's ongoing battle with the mayor over the town's need for a proper jail instead of the single cell at the back of his office. "Hargrove says the town can't afford it," Matthew explained, "but then he finds money for new gas lamps outside the bank. Priorities." Hannah laughed at his exasperated expression. "Perhaps I could help, a petition signed by concerned citizens. Or include civic responsibility in my curriculum to raise a generation that values proper law enforcement." "Playing the long game, I see," Matthew chuckled. "Devious, Miss Vance, I like it." The afternoon passed pleasantly, and Hannah found herself reluctant for it to end. There was something about Matthew's company that made her feel both safe and alive, a combination she hadn't experienced in a very long time. As they packed up the remains of their picnic, a distant rumble of thunder caught their attention. "Storm coming," Matthew observed, glancing at the darkening western sky. "We should head back." They had just reached the edge of town when the first heavy drops began to fall. By the time they reached Hannah's cottage, the rain was coming down in sheets. They burst through the door, laughing and breathless. "You're soaked," Hannah exclaimed, reaching for a towel. "Here, dry off before you catch your death." Matthew accepted the towel, running it over his dripping hair. "Not the first time I've been caught in a downpour and won't be the last." He glanced out the window at the intensifying storm. "Looks like it's settling in for a while." Hannah bit her lip, aware of the impropriety of entertaining a man alone in her home, yet equally aware that sending him back out into the storm would be unkind. "Perhaps you should wait it out," she suggested. "I could make tea." Matthew hesitated, clearly conscious of the same concerns. "I don't want to cause talk. Your reputation is already established as the respectable schoolteacher," Hannah finished for him. "And you're the town marshal." "Surely no one would think," she broke off, a blush rising in her cheeks. "They might," Matthew said softly, his eyes meeting hers, "because they'd be right about how I feel, even if nothing improper happened." The admission hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Hannah's heart raced as she processed his words. "And how do you feel, Matthew?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He moved closer, the damp towel forgotten in his hands. "I think you know, I've never met anyone like you, Hannah. Your strength, your kindness, your determination. From that first day when you walked into town with your head high despite everything." Hannah swallowed hard, her own feelings impossible to deny any longer. "I feel the same," she admitted, "but I'm afraid my past doesn't matter to me," Matthew interrupted gently. We all have pasts, Hannah. It's the future I'm interested in. He reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished, and touched her cheek with calloused fingers. Hannah leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of it. May I court you properly, Hannah Vance? Matthew asked formally, with your permission and the understanding that I have only the most honorable intentions. A smile bloomed on Hannah's face. Yes, she said simply, I would like that very much. The storm outside seemed to fade into insignificance as Matthew's face lit up with joy. Slowly, respectfully, he leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Then I'll start by taking my leave before this rain stops and gives me no excuse to linger, he said, his voice husky. A proper courtship deserves a proper beginning. Hannah walked him to the door where he paused once more. I'll see you tomorrow at the school opening. I'll save you a seat in the front row, she promised. After Matthew left, Hannah leaned against the closed door, her heart fuller than she could remember it being in years. Tomorrow she would begin her new role as Redemption Creek's teacher, and apparently, as the object of the town marshal's affections. The thought brought both excitement and trepidation. There was still so much of her past she hadn't shared, secrets that might change how he saw her. But for tonight, she would allow herself to simply be happy, to believe that perhaps redemption was possible after all. The first day of school dawned bright and clear, as if the previous day's storm had washed the world clean. Hannah dressed carefully in her new blue dress, pinning her hair in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. She wanted to present a picture of calm authority to her new students, despite the butterflies in her stomach. She arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early to make final preparations, arranging books and writing her name neatly on the blackboard. Miss Vance. The chalk dust settled on her fingers, familiar and comforting. At 8 o'clock precisely, Hannah rang the school bell, its clear tone carrying across the town. Within minutes, children began arriving, some eager, some reluctant, all curious about their new teacher. Parents accompanied the youngest ones, offering Hannah polite greetings and sometimes apologetic explanations about missed schoolwork. By 15:15, 22 students had taken their seats, ranging from 6-year-old Lily Simmons, the telegraph operator's daughter, to 16-year-old James Reardon, a tall boy with serious eyes who clearly would rather have been helping on his family's ranch. Hannah stood before them, hands clasped to hide their slight tremor. Good morning, children. I'm Miss Vance, and I'll be your teacher. I'm looking forward to getting to know each of you and helping you learn and grow this year. From the back of the room, someone snickered. Hannah's eyes found the source, a girl of about 14 with elaborately curled hair and an expensive dress. One of the Atkinson girls, Hannah guessed from Mrs. Lloyd's descriptions. Is something amusing, miss? Hannah asked calmly. Atkinson, Violet Atkinson, the girl replied with a smirk. Just thinking it's funny to be taught by someone who came to town in rags. My mother says you're probably a runaway or worse. A ripple of whispers spread through the classroom. Hannah felt heat rising in her cheeks, but kept her expression composed. Miss Atkinson, in this classroom we treat everyone with respect, regardless of their circumstances, she said evenly. That includes your fellow students, myself, and indeed yourself. I suggest you consider that before speaking again. Violet's smirk faltered slightly, but she tossed her curls defiantly. Hannah held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned to address the class as a whole. As I was saying, I'm looking forward to our time together. Let's begin by learning a bit about each other. When I call your name, please stand and tell us one thing you hope to learn this year. The morning proceeded more smoothly after that, though Hannah remained aware of Violet's sullen presence. Most of the children were eager to learn, or at least well-behaved enough to give that impression. By lunchtime, Hannah had begun to match names to faces and personalities. As the children spilled outside to eat their packed lunches, Hannah noticed a familiar figure approaching Matthew, looking official in his marshal's badge, but with a warm smile that was just for her. How's the first day going, Miss Vance? He asked, loud enough for the lingering students to hear. Very well, Marshal Finch, Hannah replied with matching formality, though her eyes conveyed a more personal greeting. The children are bright and engaging. Glad to hear it. Matthew glanced at the students scattered around the schoolyard. I thought I might address the class briefly this afternoon if you don't mind, talk a bit about the law and staying safe. That would be wonderful, Hannah agreed. 1 o'clock, Matthew nodded, tipping his hat. I'll be back then. Don't let them run you too ragged. As he walked away, Hannah noticed Violet Atkinson watching the exchange with narrowed eyes. The girl whispered something to her companion, both of them giggling behind their hands. Hannah sighed inwardly, recognizing the challenge ahead with that particular student. The afternoon session began with Matthew's talk, which captivated even the most restless students. He spoke about the importance of laws, the history of justice in the West, and the responsibilities of citizens in a growing community. Hannah watched him from her desk, impressed by his natural way with the children and the respect they showed him. "Any questions?" he asked as he concluded. Several hands shot up and Matthew called on a small boy in the front row. "Is it true you killed 3 outlaws in a gunfight last year?" the child asked eagerly. Matthew's expression grew serious. "No, Tommy, that's not true." "And that's an important lesson. Don't believe every story you hear, especially ones that make violence sound exciting or admirable. I've had to use my gun in the line of duty, yes, but it's never something to brag about or celebrate." The boy looked suitably chastened, and Hannah felt a renewed appreciation for Matthew's character. He wasn't just a lawman, he was a thoughtful, ethical man who understood the impact of his words on impressionable minds. After Matthew left, Hannah continued with the afternoon's lessons, assessing her students' knowledge levels and setting appropriate work. By the time she rang the dismissal bell, she felt both exhausted and exhilarated. Teaching again brought a fulfillment she had deeply missed. As the children filed out, Violet Atkinson paused at Hannah's desk. "My mother says the marshal is only interested in you because he feels sorry for you," she said, her voice sweet with malice. "She says no respectable man would court a woman with such a mysterious past." Hannah maintained her composure, though the words stung. "Thank you for your concern, Miss Atkinson. I'll see you tomorrow. Please don't forget your arithmetic assignment." Violet's eyes narrowed at Hannah's refusal to engage, but she flounced out without further comment. When the last child had left, Hannah sank into her chair, letting out a long breath. She had expected challenges, but the personal nature of Violet's attack had caught her off guard. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Matthew stood there, hat in hand. "Thought you might want some company walking home," he said. "First day can be tiring." "That would be lovely," Hannah admitted, gathering her things. "It was wonderful, actually, but yes, exhausting." As they walked toward her cottage, Hannah debated whether to mention Violet's comments. Part of her wanted to keep them to herself, but she was tired of secrets. "The Atkinson girl seems to have taken a dislike to me," she said carefully. "She mentioned that her mother has concerns about my background." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Gertrude Atkinson has concerns about everyone who doesn't bow and scrape to her. Don't let it trouble you." "It's not just that," Hannah said, stopping to face him. "Matthew, there are things about my past that I haven't told you, things that might change how you feel." Matthew's expression softened. "Hannah, I meant what I said yesterday. Your past is your own. When you're ready to share it, I'll listen without judgment. Until then, it doesn't change how I feel about you." His simple acceptance nearly undid her. "You might regret those words when you know the truth." "I doubt that very much," Matthew said gently. "But even so, I'd rather regret knowing than never having known you at all." They had reached Hannah's cottage, and she hesitated on the threshold. "Would you like to come in, I think?" "I think I'm ready to tell you my story." Inside, Hannah prepared tea while gathering her courage. When they were seated at the small table, steam rising from their cups, she began. "My father was a banker in Philadelphia, respected, successful, or so everyone thought. My mother died when I was 16, and afterward he changed. Started drinking, gambling. I didn't realize how bad it had gotten until after he died." Hannah's fingers tightened around her cup. He'd embezzled from the bank to cover his debts. When he died suddenly of apoplexy, everything came to light. Matthew listened silently, his eyes never leaving her face. The bank covered it up to avoid a scandal, but his creditors knew. They came after me, claiming I had inherited his debts along with what little was left of our estate. One man in particular, a gambling house owner named Blackwell, was especially persistent. He offered to forgive the debt if I would marry him. Hannah shuddered at the memory. He was older than my father, with a reputation for cruelty. When I refused, he threatened to have me arrested as an accomplice to my father's crimes. "That's outrageous," Matthew said, anger flashing in his eyes. "You had nothing to do with it." "I had no way to prove that," Hannah explained, "and no money for legal representation, so I ran. I took what little my mother had left me in a separate account, what she called my Independence Fund, and fled west. I planned to go to California, but the journey was harder than I expected. I was robbed near St. Louis, had to work odd jobs to continue. By the time I reached Redemption Creek, I was desperate." She met his gaze directly. "So now you know, I'm the daughter of a thief, a fugitive of sorts. Hardly the respectable schoolteacher the town believes me to be." Matthew was quiet for a long moment, processing her story. "Did you steal anything, Hannah?" "No," she said firmly. "Did you know about your father's crimes while he was committing them?" "No, I swear it. I would have tried to stop him." "Then you've done nothing wrong," Matthew said simply. "You're the victim here, not the criminal." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes at his immediate acceptance. The town might not see it that way if they knew. Maybe, maybe not. People can surprise you. Matthew reached across the table and took her hand. "But it doesn't change how I see you, Hannah. You're still the brave woman who walked into town with her head high despite everything. The brilliant teacher who connects with every child in that classroom, the woman I've come to care for deeply." Hannah's heart swelled at his words. "Even knowing I might have powerful enemies back east." "That someday Blackwell might track me down." "Let him try," Matthew said, his voice hardening. "He'd find that things work differently here. We protect our own in Redemption Creek, our own." The words warmed Hannah from within. She had been alone for so long, responsible only for herself, that the idea of belonging somewhere to someone was almost overwhelming. "Thank you for trusting me with this," Matthew said, squeezing her hand gently. "It can't have been easy to carry that burden alone." "It wasn't," Hannah admitted, "but it feels lighter now sharing it with you." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, hands still joined across the table. Then Matthew cleared his throat. "There's a dance this Saturday for the Harvest Festival. Would you do me the honor of accompanying me?" The sudden change of subject made Hannah smile. "Are you asking me to the dance, Marshal Finch?" "I believe I am, Miss Vance," he replied, a twinkle in his eye. "With the most honorable of intentions, of course." "Then yes," Hannah said, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "I would be delighted." The harvest dance was held in the town hall, transformed for the occasion with autumn decorations, golden wheat sheaves, bright orange pumpkins, and red maple leaves gathered from the surrounding countryside. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the proceedings, and a small band played lively tunes on fiddle, banjo, and piano. Hannah wore her best dress, newly made from fabric misses. Lloyd had helped her select a deep burgundy that complemented her chestnut hair, which she wore partly up, with soft curls framing her face. She felt beautiful for the first time in months, perhaps years. When Matthew arrived to escort her, his appreciative gaze confirmed it. "You look stunning," he said, his voice husky. "You clean up rather well yourself, Marshal," Hannah replied with a smile. Matthew had indeed made an effort, wearing a crisp white shirt with a black string tie and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. The walk to the town hall was magical, the autumn evening cool but pleasant, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Hannah was acutely aware of Matthew's hand at the small of her back as he guided her through the doors into the bustling celebration. Their entrance did not go unnoticed. Conversations paused briefly as people turned to look, some smiling in approval, others watching with more calculation in their eyes. Hannah recognized Mrs. Atkinson among the latter, whispering behind her fan to another woman. "Ignore them," Matthew murmured, sensing her tension. "Tonight is for enjoying ourselves," and enjoy themselves they did. Matthew proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding Hannah confidently through waltzes and lively reels. They laughed together when she missed a step, his hands steady on her waist to keep her from stumbling. During a break in the dancing, they accepted cups of punch from a beaming Mrs. Lloyd. "You two make a handsome couple," she said approvingly. "Don't they, George?" Mr. Lloyd nodded in agreement. "Indeed they do. The whole town's talking about it." "The whole town needs a new topic of conversation," Matthew said dryly, but his eyes were warm as they met Hannah's. As the evening progressed, Hannah found herself increasingly at ease. Most of the townspeople were welcoming, many expressing appreciation for her work with their children. Even Mayor Hargrove stopped by to offer his compliments on the successful start to the school term. "The council is very pleased with our choice," he said pompously. "Very pleased indeed." "Thank you, Mayor," Hannah replied. "I'm enjoying getting to know the children." Yes, well, carry on." He moved away to greet other constituents, and Matthew rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "Hargrove's already taking credit for your success," he observed. "That means you've truly been accepted." The band struck up a slower waltz, and Matthew led Hannah back to the dance floor. As they moved together in perfect harmony, Hannah felt a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. Matthew's hand was warm against hers, his arm secure around her waist, his eyes never leaving her face. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly as they turned. "That I'm happier than I've been in a very long time," Hannah admitted. "That coming to Redemption Creek might be the best decision I ever made." "I'm inclined to agree," Matthew said, his voice deepening, "for entirely selfish reasons." The intensity of his gaze made Hannah's heart race. There was no mistaking the emotion in his eyes. It mirrored what she felt growing in her own heart. As the waltz ended, Matthew didn't immediately release her hand. "Would you like to step outside for some air?" he asked. "It's getting rather warm in here." The night air was crisp and refreshing after the heat of the crowded hall. They walked a short distance to a bench beneath a large oak tree, far enough from the building for privacy, but still within the circle of light from the lanterns hung along the path. "Beautiful night," Hannah remarked, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Beautiful company," Matthew countered, his eyes on her face. Hannah blushed, grateful for the darkness that hid her reaction. "You're quite the charmer, Marshal Finch. Only with you," he said, suddenly serious. "Hannah, these past few weeks, getting to know you has been the greatest joy of my life since Sarah died. I never thought I'd feel this way again." Hannah's breath caught at his candor. "Matthew, please let me finish," he said gently. "I know it hasn't been long, and I'm not asking for any declarations or promises tonight. I just want you to know that my feelings for you are deep and genuine. When the time is right, I hope you might consider a more permanent arrangement between us." The implied proposal, tentative as it was, filled Hannah with both joy and trepidation. "Matthew, I care for you too, more than I thought possible after everything that happened. But my past is just that, the past," he interrupted firmly. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. If that man Blackwell ever shows his face in Redemption Creek, he'll find himself facing not just me, but an entire town that stands behind its schoolteacher." The confidence in his voice was reassuring, but Hannah needed to be certain. "And if my reputation were to be questioned? If the town learned about my father's crimes? Then we'd weather that storm too," Matthew said without hesitation. "Hannah, don't you see, you've already proven yourself here. The way you teach those children, the care you show them, that's who you truly are. Not your father's daughter, but your own person, a person I admire and love." The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Hannah's heart seemed to expand in her chest, making it difficult to breathe. "You don't have to say anything now," Matthew added quickly. "I understand if you need time." "I don't," Hannah said, finding her voice at last. "Need time, that is. Matthew, I love you too. It scares me how quickly and completely I've come to feel this way, but I can't deny it." The joy that illuminated Matthew's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned closer. "May I kiss you, Hannah Vance?" he whispered. "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle but firm, a promise and a declaration all at once. Hannah's hands found his shoulders, steadying herself as the world seemed to spin around them. The kiss deepened, Matthew's arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the day you arrived in town," he confessed. Hannah laughed softly. "Even in my rags, especially in your rags," Matthew said, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek. "You looked like an angel who'd fallen to earth but hadn't forgotten her grace. When those fools laughed at you, all I could think was how they couldn't see what was right in front of them, that your rags looked holy that night, because they couldn't diminish your light." Tears pricked Hannah's eyes at the beautiful sentiment. "No one has ever seen me the way you do," she whispered. "Then everyone else has been blind," Matthew said simply. He kissed her once more, briefly but tenderly, then stood and offered her his hand. "We should return to the dance before they send out a search party." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the lively music and warm light of the town hall, both aware that something profound had shifted between them. The future, which had once seemed so uncertain to Hannah, now held the promise of love, security, and belonging. As autumn gave way to winter, Hannah and Matthew's courtship became the talk of Redemption Creek. They attended church together on Sundays, took walks when weather permitted, and often shared meals at Mrs. Grayson's boarding house, where the older woman watched their growing affection with obvious approval. Hannah threw herself into her teaching with renewed passion. Most of her students were thriving under her guidance, even Violet Atkinson, who had gradually softened her hostility when it became clear that Hannah wasn't intimidated by her barbs. The girl was actually quite intelligent, Hannah discovered, with a talent for mathematics that simply needed nurturing. As Christmas approached, the town buzzed with preparations for the holiday. Hannah organized a Christmas pageant at the school, with every child having a part to play. Parents helped construct simple sets and costumes, and for weeks, the schoolhouse rang with the sound of carols being practiced. The night of the pageant, the schoolhouse was packed with proud parents and community members. Hannah stood at the back, watching as her students performed the nativity story with varying degrees of confidence and competence. Her heart swelled with pride as even the shyest children delivered their lines clearly, encouraged by her gentle coaching. Matthew found her there, slipping his hand into hers discreetly. "You've worked wonders with them," he murmured. "Look at James Reardon, the boy who barely spoke when school started is now playing Joseph with real conviction." It was true. The once reluctant student had blossomed under Hannah's tutelage, discovering a love for literature that surprised everyone, including himself. "They're remarkable children," Hannah said softly. "All they needed was someone to believe in them." When the performance ended to enthusiastic applause, Hannah stepped forward to thank the parents and congratulate her students. The children presented her with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her name embossed on the cover. "For all your stories and lessons, Miss Vance," explained Emily Lloyd, who had organized the collection of funds for the gift, "so you can write them down and remember us always." Tears sprang to Hannah's eyes as she accepted the thoughtful present. "Thank you all. I will cherish this and each of you always." After the schoolhouse had emptied, Matthew helped Hannah extinguish the lanterns and tidy up. The winter night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black sky as they walked toward Hannah's cottage. "I have something for you too," Matthew said as they reached her door. "A Christmas gift, though it's still a few days early." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box wrapped in silver paper. Hannah accepted it with trembling fingers, suddenly nervous about what it might contain. "Open it," Matthew encouraged gently. Inside the box lay a delicate gold locket on a fine chain. Hannah gasped as she lifted it out, the metal catching the moonlight. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Open it," Matthew said again, his voice lower this time. Hannah carefully unlatched the locket to reveal two tiny portraits, one of herself, one of Matthew, expertly painted in miniature. "How?" "Mrs. Lloyd's sister is an artist," Matthew explained. "She was visiting last month and I commissioned her to paint us from sketches. Do you like it?" "I love it," Hannah said sincerely, emotion thick in her voice. "Would you help me put it on?" Matthew stepped behind her, taking the necklace and carefully fastening it around her neck. His fingers brushed her skin, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. As she turned to face him, his expression grew serious. "Hannah, I have something to ask you, and I'm hoping this locket might be just the beginning of what I want to give you." Hannah's heart began to race as Matthew took both her hands in his. "These past months have been the happiest of my life," he said. "You've brought light and joy back into my world when I thought those things were gone forever." Slowly, he sank to one knee in the snow, still holding her hands. "Hannah Vance, I love you with all my heart. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Though she had suspected this moment was coming, the reality of it, Matthew kneeling before her, his eyes filled with love and hope, overwhelmed Hannah. Tears spilled down her cheeks as joy bubbled up within her. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain despite her tears. "Yes, Matthew, I will marry you." Matthew rose and gathered her in his arms, his kiss full of promise and passion. When they finally parted, both breathless and laughing, he reached into his pocket once more. "I almost forgot the most important part," he said, producing a simple but elegant gold ring with a small pearl set in the center. "It was my grandmother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "If you'd prefer something else, it's perfect," Hannah interrupted, admiring the way the pearl gleamed in the moonlight. "Absolutely perfect." They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the newly completed church with Reverend Williams officiating. Mrs. Grayson insisted on hosting the wedding breakfast at the boarding house, and the entire town turned out to celebrate. Even Mrs. Atkinson and her daughters attended, though Gertrude's smile remained tight as she congratulated the couple. "I hope you'll be very happy," she said, her tone suggesting some doubt on the matter. "We will be, Mrs. Atkinson," Hannah replied serenely. "Thank you for your kind wishes." Matthew's hand tightened around hers as they moved on to greet other guests. "You handled that graciously," he murmured. "I find I no longer care about her approval," Hannah confessed, "or anyone's really except yours." "You'll always have that," Matthew assured her, his eyes warm with love. Their first months as husband and wife were a joyful adjustment. Hannah continued teaching while also learning to manage a household. They had decided to live in Matthew's house, a comfortable two-bedroom structure closer to the center of town than Hannah's cottage. The second bedroom, Matthew explained with a meaningful look, would hopefully not remain empty for long. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal, painting the mountains with wildflowers and bringing longer, warmer days. Hannah's students were thriving, and she and Matthew had settled into a harmonious rhythm of shared life. It was on a mild April morning that the telegram arrived. Hannah was at school, reviewing arithmetic with her younger students when Matthew appeared at the classroom door, his expression grave. "Hannah," he said, his voice tight, "may I speak with you privately?" Alarmed, Hannah asked her oldest student to supervise for a moment and stepped into the hallway. "What is it? What's happened?" Matthew held out a telegram. This came from the Marshal in Denver. "Someone's been asking questions about you. They're a man matching Blackwell's description." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face as she took the paper with trembling fingers. How did he find me?" "He hasn't, not yet," Matthew assured her quickly, "but he's getting closer. The Denver Marshal is a friend of mine. He told this Blackwell he'd never heard of a Hannah Vance, but Blackwell might not believe him," Hannah finished, her mind racing, "or he might continue west, checking every town along the way." Matthew's jaw tightened. "I won't let him harm you, Hannah, I promise you that." Hannah nodded, trying to quell the fear rising within her. "I know, but what if he causes trouble for you, for the town? What if he tries to take me back to Philadelphia by force?" "He won't get the chance," Matthew said firmly. "This is your home now, and I'm your husband. No one is taking you anywhere against your will." Despite his reassurance, worry gnawed at Hannah throughout the day. By the time she dismissed her students, she had made a decision. She couldn't hide forever, couldn't live in fear of Blackwell's shadow. There had to be a way to resolve this once and for all. When she shared her thoughts with Matthew that evening, he listened intently, his expression serious. "It's risky," he said when she finished explaining her plan, "but you might be right." Confronting this head-on could be the only way to truly put it behind us. "Will you help me?" Hannah asked, though she already knew the answer. "In this and everything," Matthew promised, taking her hand. "We'll face it together." The next day, Matthew sent telegrams to contacts in law enforcement across several states, describing Blackwell and requesting information. Meanwhile, Hannah wrote a long letter to her father's former business partner in Philadelphia, a man who had always been kind to her. She explained her situation frankly and asked if he might be willing to provide a statement clearing her name of any wrongdoing in her father's affairs. 2 weeks passed with no sign of Blackwell in Redemption Creek, but Hannah remained vigilant. She confided in Mrs. Grayson and the Lloyds, wanting trusted friends to be aware of the potential danger. "That scoundrel shows his face here. He'll have more than the marshal to deal with," Mr. Lloyd declared, his usually mild manner hardened with protective anger. "No one threatens our teacher." The response from Philadelphia arrived in early May, a thick envelope containing not only a sworn statement from her father's partner confirming Hannah's innocence, but also affidavits from 2 bank directors, and a letter from a sympathetic judge suggesting that Blackwell himself was under investigation for fraud and intimidation of several women in similar circumstances to Hannah's. "This changes everything," Matthew said, relief evident in his voice as they read the documents together. "With these, Blackwell has no legal claim against you whatsoever. In fact, he's the one at risk if these investigations proceed." Hannah felt as if a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "I can hardly believe it," she whispered. After all this time, to be truly free of him, their relief was short-lived. The very next day, a stranger arrived in Redemption Creek, a well-dressed man in his 50s with cold eyes and an imperious manner. Hannah was in the schoolhouse when one of her students, young Tommy Clark, burst in during lunch recess. "Miss Vance, I mean Mrs. Finch," he corrected himself, still adjusting to her married name. "There's a fancy man at the hotel asking all about you." Hannah's blood ran cold. "What kind of questions, Tommy, when you came to town where you live, if you're really a teacher?" the boy reported. "Pa told him to mind his own business, but he's offering money for information." "Thank you for telling me, Tommy," Hannah said, striving to keep her voice calm. "Would you run to the marshal's office and tell my husband I need to see him right away? It's very important." The boy nodded solemnly and dashed off. Hannah closed and locked the schoolhouse door, her heart pounding. After so many months of safety, to have Blackwell suddenly appear in her town, her sanctuary, felt like a violation. Matthew arrived within minutes, his expression grim. "I've heard," he said without preamble. "He's registered at the hotel as Edward Blackwell, says he's looking for a former employee who stole from him." "That's a lie," Hannah said fiercely. "I never worked for him, and I certainly never stole anything." "I know that," Matthew assured her. "And we have the documents to prove it." He took her hands, his voice softening. "Hannah, we knew this might happen. We're prepared." Hannah took a deep breath, steadying herself. Yes, we are. What do we do now?" "I've already sent Tommy to gather the town council at the mayor's office," Matthew explained. "I think it's time to tell them the full story with the evidence we have. Then, when Blackwell makes his move, we'll be ready." "All right," Hannah agreed, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "Let's go." The town council listened in grave silence as Hannah recounted her history, Matthew at her side providing the documents from Philadelphia when necessary. When she finished, there was a long pause before Mayor Hargrove cleared his throat. "Well, Mrs. Finch," he said, using her married name pointedly, "it seems to me that this Blackwell character is the real criminal here, not you. Redemption Creek stands by its own, and you're one of us now." The other council members nodded in agreement, even Dr. Peterson, who had initially seemed skeptical, was now firmly supportive. "No man has the right to persecute an innocent woman," he declared. "We won't allow it." Hannah felt tears of gratitude stinging her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I cannot express what your support means to me." "The question now," Reverend Williams said pragmatically, "is how to handle Mr. Blackwell when he makes his accusations public." "Let him," Matthew said, his voice hard with determination. "We'll be ready." They didn't have to wait long. That evening, as Hannah and Matthew sat down to supper, there was a pounding on their front door. Matthew rose, hand instinctively moving to the gun he'd set aside upon entering the house. "Stay here," he told Hannah, but she stood as well, squaring her shoulders. "No. We faced this together, remember?" Matthew's expression softened with pride as he nodded. Together, they went to the door. Matthew opened it to reveal Edward Blackwell, flanked by two burly men who looked more like hired muscle than companions. "Marshal Finch, I presume," Blackwell said, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of menace. His gaze shifted to Hannah, "And the former Miss Vance. I've been looking for you for quite some time, my dear." "I'm no longer your dear Mr. Blackwell," Hannah replied coldly. "In fact, I never was. What do you want?" Blackwell's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Simply what's owed to me, your father's debts, which legally transfer to you as his heir, plus interest, of course, and compensation for the trouble of tracking you down." "My father owed you nothing legitimate," Hannah said firmly. "Your gambling house operated outside the law, and any so-called debts incurred there are unenforceable." Blackwell's smile vanished. "You've become quite the legal expert in your time away." "Nevertheless, I have documentation of loans made directly to James Vance, with you as co-signer." "Forgeries," Hannah said without hesitation. "I never signed any such documents." "It will be your word against mine in a Philadelphia court," Blackwell replied smoothly. "And I have considerably more influence there than a runaway daughter of a disgraced banker. Now, we can handle this civilly. You return with me to face these matters properly, or—" He gestured to his companions, leaving the threat unspoken. Matthew stepped forward, his presence suddenly intimidating despite the fact that he was unarmed. "Or you can turn around and leave my wife alone, Blackwell. We have sworn statements from the bank directors and your former judge friend confirming that Hannah had no part in her father's actions. We also have evidence that you're under investigation in Philadelphia for fraud and intimidation." He smiled thinly. "How's that for documentation?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Blackwell's face. "You're bluffing. Would you like to see the papers?" Hannah offered, her confidence growing. "They're quite detailed. Apparently, I'm not the first woman you've tried to coerce through fabricated debts, but I may be the last if these investigations proceed." Blackwell's expression hardened. "This changes nothing." "I have influential friends, so do we," interrupted a new voice. Mayor Hargrove stood at the gate with Reverend Williams, Dr. Peterson, and at least a dozen other townsmen behind him. Mr. Lloyd stepped forward, a shotgun held casually but visibly in his hands. "Evening, Marshal," he called. "Thought we'd check if you and the missus needed any help entertaining your guests." Blackwell looked from the gathering crowd to Matthew's resolute face to Hannah's unwavering gaze. For the first time, he seemed to realize that he had miscalculated badly. "This is a private matter," he said stiffly. "I suggest you all return to your homes, and I suggest you leave my town," Matthew replied, steel in his voice. "Now, before I arrest you for attempted extortion and threatening a citizen of Redemption Creek." For a tense moment, it seemed Blackwell might resist. Then, with a curt nod to his men, he stepped back. "This isn't over," he said to Hannah, but his threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Yes, it is," Hannah said with quiet finality. "Goodbye, Mr. Blackwell. I suggest you don't return to Redemption Creek. Ever." As Blackwell and his men retreated down the street, the townspeople moved closer, surrounding Hannah and Matthew with protective solidarity. Mrs. Grayson pushed through the crowd to embrace Hannah fiercely. "You did well, child," she said, pride evident in her voice. "Stood your ground like you were born to it." "I had help," Hannah said, her eyes finding Matthew's over the older woman's shoulder. The love and admiration in his gaze filled her heart to overflowing. Later that night, after their friends and neighbors had dispersed and they were alone again, Matthew held Hannah close, his cheek resting against her hair. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Better than all right," Hannah replied truthfully. "For the first time in years, I feel completely free. No more looking over my shoulder, no more fear that my past will catch up with me." She tilted her face up to his. And it's because you believed in me from the very beginning, even when I arrived in rags with nothing but determination to my name." "I saw your worth immediately," Matthew said, stroking her cheek tenderly. "When they laughed at you that day, all I could think was how blind they were not to see what I saw, that those rags looked holy because they couldn't dim your light." Hannah kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "I love you, Matthew Finch," she whispered against his lips, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Hannah Finch," he replied, his arms tightening around her, now and always. 5 years later, the schoolhouse rang with the sound of children's laughter as Hannah dismissed her students for the summer. She stood at the door, accepting small gifts of wildflowers and hand-drawn cards, her heart full as she watched them scatter into the bright June afternoon. At 30, Hannah had grown into her role not just as a teacher, but as a respected member of Redemption Creek. Her school had flourished, with students now coming from outlying farms and ranches for her well-regarded instruction. Last year, the town council had approved funds for an expansion, adding a second classroom and hiring an assistant teacher to help with the growing number of pupils. As the last child disappeared down the path, Hannah gathered her belongings and locked the schoolhouse door. The walk home was pleasant, the summer air fragrant with blooming wildflowers. She paused at the general store where Mrs. Lloyd greeted her warmly. "Last day of school," the older woman exclaimed. "The children will be running wild now, I suppose," Hannah laughed. "Only until I assign summer reading next week. That should keep them occupied for a while." "You're good for this town, Hannah Finch," Mrs. Lloyd said affectionately. "Oh, before I forget, that book Matthew ordered for Emma came in. Would you like to take it with you, please?" Hannah nodded. Their 4-year-old daughter had inherited her parents' love of reading and was already showing remarkable aptitude for letters and numbers. With the package tucked under her arm, Hannah continued home, a larger house now, built 2 years ago when Emma was born, and it became clear that Matthew's small place wouldn't be sufficient for their growing family. The 2-story white clapboard house stood on a gentle rise just outside town, with a view of the mountains Matthew loved and the garden Hannah had cultivated with care. As she approached, Hannah saw her husband in the front yard, their daughter perched on his shoulders as he pointed out something in the distance. The sight never failed to warm her heart. Matthew, so strong and capable, yet so gentle with their child. Emma's dark curls, so like her father's, bounced as she gestured excitedly. "Mama," the little girl called out, spotting Hannah, "Papa's teaching me about birds." "Is he now?" Hannah replied, smiling as she opened the gate. "And what have you learned?" "That one's a red-winged blackbird," Emma said proudly, pointing to a bird perched on a nearby fence post. "And that big one up high is a hawk. Papa says they're raptors." "Very good," Hannah praised, setting down her things to accept the enthusiastic hug Matthew lowered their daughter to deliver. "How was the last day?" Matthew asked, bending to kiss his wife hello. "Bittersweet, as always," Hannah admitted. "I'll miss them, though I won't mind the break." "You'll have plenty to keep you busy," Matthew said, his eyes twinkling with a secret. "Oh," Hannah raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning, Marshal Finch?" "The town council approved it this morning," he said, unable to contain his excitement any longer. "Funding for a proper library, with you as head librarian alongside your teaching duties. Mayor Hargrove said it was high time Redemption Creek invested in its intellectual future, though I suspect he was mostly quoting Mrs. Hargrove." Hannah gasped with delight. "A real library." "Oh, Matthew, that's wonderful. I've been hoping for so long." "I know," he said, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Construction starts next month. It will be next to the school with a connecting door so you can use it for lessons." "Can I help in the library too, Mama?" Emma asked, her young face alight with interest. "I can put books on shelves," Hannah laughed, lifting her daughter into her arms. "Of course you can, sweetheart. You'll be my very special assistant." As they went inside together, Hannah marveled at how completely her life had transformed in just 5 years. From a desperate woman fleeing her past to a cherished wife and mother, a respected teacher, and now the future librarian of a growing town. The journey had been remarkable. Later that evening, after Emma was tucked into bed with a story and kisses from both parents, Hannah and Matthew sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and pink. Matthew's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. Happy? He asked, his voice low and intimate in the gathering dusk. Completely, Hannah replied without hesitation. Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life, that I found you and this town and this happiness. I think about that day often, Matthew admitted. The day you walked into town in that torn dress, head held high despite everything. How something told me immediately that you were special. Hannah smiled at the memory that had once been painful but was now simply part of their story. They laughed when I arrived in rags, she recalled softly. And I said then, rags look holy tonight, Matthew finished, pressing a kiss to her temple. The truest words I ever spoke. You were a vision, Hannah Vance Finch, rags and all. I love you, Hannah said simply, turning to meet his gaze in the fading light. Then, now, always. And I love you, Matthew replied, his kiss a promise renewed. My holy vision in rags turned miracle in truth. As darkness fell gently around them and stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Hannah Finch sat contentedly in her husband's embrace, surrounded by the life they had built together. From desperate beginnings had come profound joy, from judgment had come acceptance, and from rags had come redemption not just for her, but for the man who had seen her worth from the very beginning. In Redemption Creek, Hannah had indeed found redemption, but more importantly, she had found love, a love that had transformed them both and would continue to sustain them through all the days to come.